meeting of January the 24th at 5:30 p.m. We've called the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Alvarez. Councilmember Marty Medina.
Here.
Councilmember Salazar.
Here.
Vice Mayor Hamilton.
Here.
Mayor Medina.
Here. Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to item 3, public comments for items not on the agenda. If there's any individuals here in the audience or on Zoom that wish to speak on items that are not on the agenda, and tonight we have a study session that is listed, but other than that, are there any members of the public?
I have no speaker cards, and I do not have any virtual hands raised.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 4, study session.
Item 4, conduct study session and provide direction, regulations for outdoor dining facilities in city streets and on private property.
Thank you very much. We'll now have an intro from the Assistant City Manager, and then we'll introduce our presenters.
Yes, good evening, Honorable Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Council members. I'm honored to be here tonight to talk about outdoor dining regulations in both city streets and private property. Darcy Smith, Assistant City Manager. So I'll be kicking this off. We have quite a long presentation, but that's mainly because this is a robust subject. And I'll just start by saying this is an exciting thing, I think, because what we saw during the pandemic is a lot of people like outdoor dining. So we're here to talk tonight really about how the city may consider regulations to continue that. So it's a study session. I'll cover the objective briefly, give you some background. I will turn it over to Haywan Ritchie, the city engineer and deputy director for Public Works, to cover the draft regulations for outdoor dining facilities on private property, on public property, in the form of parklets, which are in city streets and more specifically in the downtown on San Mateo Avenue. So very limited defined area. Then Peter Gilley, our new Community and Economic Development Director, will cover the draft regulations for outdoor dining facilities on private property. And that, frankly, is a more robust policy conversation because it's new material tonight. And it also involves some sort of more robust policy conversations based on some existing businesses in the city. So that will be the bulk of the presentation. And part of his presentation will also cover the impact on businesses with outdoor dining that were established during the pandemic. And we did provide notice to those businesses. You received a comment letter this afternoon from one of those businesses, and I believe we have audience members who represent them. But we did do the outreach to those business owners, both in the downtown and to these existing businesses. And we'll close with tonight's recommended action related to the study session. So again, the objective is to hold the study session on outdoor dining for the City Council and public, provide their input, receive council direction on these draft regulations for outdoor dining facilities in the streets and on private property. So I'll cover the background. Again, why are we here? Well, hard to believe, almost 3 years ago, the pandemic started. I think we can all breathe a sigh of relief that it's winding down, but that sort of means more work for cities. Because in the beginning, we had a different body of work about worrying about restaurants going out of business when their indoor dining was limited or actually completely eliminated for some businesses, literally overnight. City and county offered grants to support those businesses during that tough time. But we're here to talk tonight about how we make that transition. You might remember the state and city allowed businesses to set up temporary outdoor dining operations on private and public property. Also included things like fitness facilities, personal services uses. Some of those uses are entirely back to indoor operations. But what we saw with dining is that people actually enjoyed it and had a robust menu of benefits kind of beyond the pandemic, which is why we're here tonight. So during the pandemic, the EOC was activated, as you might recall, and the city issued 2 executive orders. The first one in June 2020 allowed temporary outdoor dining on public and private property, subject to some defined requirements. In August of 2020, those were changed to be a little more robust and cover more outdoor operations such as card rooms, fitness facilities, personal services, and restaurants. And again, there were requirements set in place, but to some extent they were just relaxed. So those emergency provisions spun up during the pandemic were somewhat lenient. They waived sort of typical standards that the city would apply, waived permit processes, which we'll talk a little bit about tonight, because again, one of the main regulatory functions of government is to regulate through permits. Some parking requirements were waived, and then enforcement actions, of course, were waived. This really helped businesses. I mean, it really helped them, as you'll hear from some of our business owners, maintain operations when indoor operations were reduced or prohibited. It allowed them to operate in a safe manner, and it really kept those businesses alive during the pandemic. Important to note that what we allowed during the pandemic is a little bit different than what we're talking about tonight. We allowed sidewalks or parking areas that were immediately in front of the business as the preferred location. We did not allow parklets at that time. We had some concerns about safety and aesthetics and just, again, throwing them up overnight. We want the council to be thoughtful, deliberate in their actions, and to balance the needs of all users of the streets and other needs like parking, and also to allow the city engineering division to optimize safety and design of these. But it's really important to note they provide a community benefit. They activate the street, they provide a pedestrian-friendly experience, they get people outdoors, and I think we've seen that that promotes kind of a healthy lifestyle, healthy environment. So again, we're here tonight to talk about this transition. Why are we here? Well, in October of last year, Governor Gavin Newsom announced that he intends that this COVID-19 state of emergency that started back in March 2020 will end on February 28th, 2023. So with that in mind, many other cities, just like us, have been here tonight about that transition, how you make the transition from some temporary emergency regulations to permanent regulations to serve the city for a more permanent period into the future. So with that upcoming anticipated end of the state of related local emergency orders, what I mentioned previously, the city's executive orders, those would sunset. So staff recommends adopting new permanent regulations and permit processes for outdoor dining. Again, this would allow restaurants throughout the city an opportunity to offer outdoor dining beyond the pandemic. So you held a study session in September of 2021. That body of work that you reviewed was prepared by the Public Works Department, who initiated development of the Parklet program, which they'll highlight again tonight. And again, that would regulate parklets in public parking spaces, parallel parking spaces on San Mateo Avenue, only in the downtown. That was the feedback we got at that meeting and carrying it forward. You gave us feedback at that meeting, and based on the feedback, additional work, which Ms. Ritchie will highlight, was completed on the Parklet program. So we have that before you tonight. But again, we also have these robust new private property regulations. And again, that's based on what we've heard from the business community, that but outdoor dining has helped their economics, and they would like to continue it. So that's presented for the City Council's consideration. So I like to start these policy meetings, study sessions, by focusing on sort of what we used as our purpose and guiding policy objectives. City Council may consider these when setting policies, deciding sort of whether and how to regulate these land uses. And how to approach the permit processes. Because again, right now, we don't have established permit processes for either parklets or dining on private property unless it's wrapped into a building permit. So we have processed permits through the years, building permits, for restaurants where they show it on their building permit plans, they provide parking for it, and it's part of the issued building permit, and it's reviewed by the city. But how the pandemic has worked is these kind of sprung up outside of a brand new restaurant establishing itself through typical building permits, so we think we need a special permit process for this. So again, we're driven by allowing restaurants the opportunity to offer outdoor dining for economic and community vitality. And there's a whole host of benefits for that. I won't rattle that off, but there's health benefits, there's social benefits, there's a lot of benefits. Benefits the business, but I want to emphasize, I think it also benefits the community. People enjoy outdoor dining. Next, provide an active pedestrian-friendly street experience. It activates the street when you have that, like sidewalk dining. It sort of turns it into less of a car-centric experience to more of a pedestrian or bicyclist experience, which I think we can all agree is good for our city and the vision that was laid out in the Transit Corridors Plan and we've built upon through other plans. Important, though, to balance the needs of all users of the streets. Think about accessibility for those who are disabled. Also to ensure aesthetically pleasing design. That's again why we didn't want them just sprung up overnight. We want to have thoughtful designs for these that are compatible with our long-range plans. Again, the Transit Corridors Plan, which has design standards, and our streetscape plan for the downtown. We also want to limit negative impacts on parking on the city streets. That's why the number's capped for the downtown parklets, and we've proposed some draft regulations to regulate private parking requirements that you'll hear about with Mr. Gillies' presentation. You'll also hear Ms. Ritchie talk about how important it is to provide adequate separation between the pedestrians and the diner, protection of the parklets from vehicle traffic. I won't expand upon the worst things that can happen with these parklets, but you just want to make sure they're safe, number one, when you put something that close to cars. We want to establish new design and operational standards to provide that appropriate regulatory oversight. Again, these are land uses, so they're typically regulated through zoning requirements. Establish efficient and streamlined permit processes to the extent possible through mainly administrative permits approved by the cities. And last, setting appropriate fees. So you'll hear about fees tonight. Again, these are new fees, and we took guidance from the City Council's past direction for adequate cost recovery for fees, especially related to private businesses. So with that all teed up, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Ritchie, who will tee up the presentation on the draft parklet regulations.
Okay. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. I'm Haywan Ritchie, the City Engineer and Deputy Public Works Director. I would like to first briefly review what a parklet is, provide an update on the work that's been done since the last study session, review some of the requirements and directions that were provided at that last study session, and as Ms. Smith, the Assistant City Manager, mentioned, review the fee study and the next steps. Oops. Yep. So a parklet is a temporary sidewalk extension that provides outdoor dining for restaurants. Parklets are typically installed within the parking lane in commercial districts. Our program is regulated by Public Works through ministerial permits required both to construct and for the temporary use of the city street. Most cities charge an annual use of space fee similar to rent for use of the public street and to offset the loss in meter revenue and for annual inspections. So I would like to briefly point out the image that you see before you on this slide, which is to the left, sidewalk with the businesses fronting the sidewalk, and then within the parking lane, right adjacent to the sidewalk, is an extension of that area for added outdoor dining. As you see in the image as well, there is a concrete K-rail that separates the vehicular traffic from the diners. I'd like to next provide an update on the parklet program. So staff has prepared application materials based on the direction provided during the last study session, prepared the fee study, and conducted an analysis of the fees and processes of nearby jurisdictions, are developing the ordinance and the permit regulations. Staff plans to take the parklet ordinance to City Council in March, April of 2023 to initiate the parklet program after adoption. So in general, for the siding, there'll be a curbside on San Mateo Avenue between Huntington Avenue and El Camino Real, directly in front of the associated restaurants where on-street parking spaces exist. They may take up to 1 to 2 parking spaces with setbacks from corners, travel lanes, and adjacent parking. Parklets will be allowed within downtown only along San Mateo Avenue in the central business district. And per the last direction provided, there will be a maximum of 5 total in downtown with 2 per block maximum. So this next slide provides a visual of the location where parklets would be allowed, again on San Mateo Avenue in downtown, fronting the central business district zoning. And of course, first and foremost in our minds is protecting the diners that are within the parklet space. Railings must separate the parklet from the street and surrounding parking spaces for safety. Some communities have chosen to have artists paint the K-rails, as you can see in the image on the top, to make them more aesthetically pleasing, as shown. We're taking it one step further and requiring the K-rail to be architecturally screened. K-rail barriers can be an integrated part of a parklet, as you see in the image below. Additionally, in terms of the parklet siding, we are requiring there to be setbacks from the travel lane of 2 feet, and between the adjacent parking of 3 feet minimum. Reflective markers would need to be affixed to the parklet or a post provided that's installed outside the travelway. Parklet length and other siding details can vary on a case-by-case basis. So I would like to next review the fee study that has been prepared. Staff recommends new fees for the parklet permit be established. A staff completed user study, which with cost estimates for city staff required to review and process and approve the parklets, which is included in attachment 3 of the staff report packet. The fee study was prepared consistent with City Council policy to maximize cost recovery for development-related services. The new parklet permit application fee is proposed to be $1,886. The city currently has established fees in the fiscal year 2022-23 master fee schedule for an encroachment permit of $350 and a revocable encroachment permit of $615. That includes the review and time required to process these various permits. Staff also recommends a parklet permit annual use of space fee be established. This is an annual rental fee charged for the temporary private use of the city public parking space, as well as to cover the cost of the annual city inspection. Staff has researched the fees and processes required by nearby jurisdictions, looking at the first 2 years of total costs. We looked at the first 2 total years, as some cities reduce the initial fees but charge higher annual use and maintenance fees. The total fee for the permits and the 2 years of use ranges from a low of about $3,500 to as high as $9,400, with an average of $6,500. After the last study session, direction was provided to require review of the parklets by the Architectural Review Committee. However, further study, analysis, and comparison of what other cities require, staff does not recommend this, as it would add an additional $3,000 to the fee and lengthen the processing time. Based on these parameters, San Bruno estimates the fee for 2 years would be $7,221. This is in line with the surveyed cities. So our next steps include planning to take the parklet ordinance to City Council in April of 2023 to begin parklet permit program after adoption. This concludes my presentation, and this is an update on the parklet program within public right-of-way, which staff will finalize and return to council for adoption soon. Next, I would like to hand off the presentation to Peter Gilley to review the outdoor dining on private property. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm Peter Gilley. I'm the Director of Community and Economic Development. As was noted, we're shifting the topic on outdoor dining from the public realm of parklets to private property. If I get the slides up there, thank you. So the regulations for outdoor dining on private property are intended to be focused on providing restaurants with the opportunity, if their site has room for it, to have permanent outdoor dining, and that can range from, in some cases, just a couple tables and chairs to much larger installations that may have structures and equipment. The regulations would also establish a permitting process for this. San Bruno's had outdoor dining on private property even prior to the pandemic. There's some examples shown on the screen and was mentioned earlier. But during the pandemic, a number of restaurants expanded their outdoor dining and actually went into parking spaces in other areas of their property where we really don't have regulations for that, which is why we're here to try to develop those. So the regulations being considered would require a business wanting outdoor dining on their property to locate it behind the sidewalk on their actual private property in an area where it can be safely accommodated according to state health and safety codes. And also to provide off-street parking based on existing regulations for whatever parking demand is generated by that use. So As the slide shows, we already have a parking requirement of 1 space for every 100 square feet of dining area. So the more dining area you add, you increase the amount of parking demand. Also, if you propose to put a outdoor dining area where there's currently parking, then you are decreasing the supply of parking that might be needed for the building. So if parking is impacted, then based on the current ordinances, you would either have to provide the parking elsewhere to offset the loss, or if you're in the transit corridors area, which all of downtown is in, you have the opportunity to pay a parking in lieu fee, and we'll go into that a little bit more. But since this is an activity we want to encourage, it's recommended that the regulations have an exemption, and what is being put forward as a proposal is that the first 200 square feet of a private property outdoor dining area be exempt from any type of parking requirement. If that exemption did not exist, 200 square feet would equate to 2 parking spaces. So it's effectively saying if you do outdoor dining up to 200 feet, you wouldn't have to provide those extra 2 spaces. And I have some illustrations of what that would mean in several different cases. The graphic on the left, imagine that is a bird's eye view or a plan view looking downward. So this is showing the sidewalk in gray, but the storefront of the restaurant isn't right at the sidewalk. There's a little bit of private property in between it, which is very common in most downtowns, including in San Bruno. So this could be an area that you could have outdoor dining in. And in the downtown, we don't really have any areas like this that would go over 200 square feet. So anyone proposing to do something like this would not have to worry about parking. Admittedly, there are some businesses that are already doing this, and that it would not be a problem under the regulations we're talking about. We also have some examples where that it may be a larger inset that actually allows more space for outdoor dining, but based on our observations, still would be under 200 square feet, and thus you could get larger tables in there in that space in the front of the building, and again, not have to worry about parking. Still has a process to go through, but you wouldn't have to worry about balancing out the parking impact. The next 2 examples are going to go into cases that under the regulations as conceived would require parking to be addressed. So this is an example of 2 buildings that have a space in between them, and one of them uses that space for outdoor dining. For this example, which is just, as I said, it's an illustration, it is not an actual site. The area that we're talking about is 800 square feet. That's the area that has the tables in them. Based on what we're proposing, that first 200 square feet, again, is exempt from parking. So you take that 800, you minus the 200 square foot exemption, you're left adding 600 square feet of area that needs to have the parking addressed. Based on our current parking ordinances, that requires 6 parking spaces. Now, as noted before, in the transit corridor plan area, of which all of downtown is in, there is the ability to pay an in lieu fee for those spaces. So the business owner would not have to find those spaces elsewhere on their property. They have an in lieu fee option. And I do have a slide upcoming that has what those in lieu fees are. This next example is instead of just space in between the buildings, there's actually a parking lot in between the buildings along the sidewalk. So in the blue is a small space that isn't in the parking area. It's just a extra area that outdoor dining could be put in. In this illustration, it happens to be under 200 square feet again. So again, you're under 200. You're not affecting existing parking. You could be exempted from having to add any parking. But let's say this business wanted to put more tables and actually wanted to take out 2 parking spaces. So the math on this one, this adds up to a total of 600 square feet used for outdoor dining. Again, you get the 200 square foot exemption. That leaves you with 400 square feet of expanded outdoor dining area. That equates to 4 parking spaces. But in this case, they took out 2 parking spaces to put the outdoor dining in. So it's really, in this case, there is 6 parking spaces in which to have to reconcile, either providing it elsewhere on the site, or if you're in the area that has the in lieu fee, being able to pay that in lieu fee. So those are kind of the variety of options. Every property is different, so we need to have rules that are able to be applied in a variety of options. There's going to be standard regulations, such as if you are have an outdoor dining area adjacent to a neighboring property, there will be a requirement that you have some type of wall or fence in between the properties for safety reasons and screening. Oftentimes, the business owner will want to do that anyway. There's also going to be some basic rules about not blocking hydrants, utilities. Code compliance is very important. These installations have to meet state codes on building and fire and health. There's other requirements about maintenance and accessibility of the installation. So the required processing, the permit and fees, there would be a new outdoor dining permit that will be reviewed and acted on by the planning division. The fee that has been is being proposed is $1,889. That is based on a fee study that was done to look at if such a permit existed and the number of hours that would go into its review. This would cost recover that. In some cases, a building permit may be required. That will depend on the scope of the project. If someone is just putting out tables and chairs, there's no need for a building permit, but depending on the extent of the work, a permit may be required. The fees for that permit is based on the valuation of that project. And then lastly, we have the in lieu fees up there. Again, this is only for the transit corridors plan. And the in lieu fee has a scale that for the 1 to 5 spaces, it's just under $3,000 per space. It increases as you pay the in lieu fee for more and more spaces, to the point where spaces over 10 add up to $12,000. The program for those in lieu fees specifically target those funds towards providing parking opportunities in downtown. So there is a nexus between the fee and the what the fee would be used for. So the next steps would be to finalize the regulations based on council direction. We would have to bring those back to hearings. This would need to go to the Planning Commission, as these are going to be zoning regulations. Those could go in March or April and then follow with council adoption afterwards. And that would be kind of the overview on what the regulations would be. But as we know, we have some existing businesses, and kind of the major question is, how will those businesses and these regulations work? So we have some imagery of 3 operations with photos of a before and after. So we have J.C. Bruno's with, from the street, a before and after of the shot of the location, our estimates on the number of parking spaces that were converted. In this case, we don't actually know the full outdoor dining size, so we'll need to, if this ordinance is passed, we'll need to work with this applicant on working out all the details. And here's some interior views. But this is a case, particularly because of its location in the downtown, they will have the opportunity to use this space for outdoor dining because of the ability to pay for parking in lieu. So there is a path forward there. Here is another example on El Camino. This site is outside the transit corridor plan, so based on our current regulations, there is no in lieu fee option. This is also a case where residential parking is taking up, and that is a concern of staff's. Health and safety codes would have to be met with whatever the final outcome is, but the challenge with this case will be working out where the parking will end up. So that will be something that we would work with this property owner for. Then lastly, another property on El Camino. Again, this is a case where if the parking demand can be offset, outdoor dining certainly works in the location. This is also outside the transit corridor, so we would have to look at other options for providing the parking. And here's some more views of how the space has kind of evolved from early pandemic to how it is at this time. So that's the conclusion of the private property section. The recommended action for council overall is to hold the study session, take public input, and provide staff with direction on both the parklet aspects of it as well as the private property aspects. And staff's available for any questions.
Thank you all for your presentations. One thing I just want to clarify, at the one restaurant with the 4 units above it, which is on El Camino, San Felipe, Celia's. So that is for the apartments. And there are 4 apartments, 4 parking spots that were under, so that's what you're referencing. I just didn't hear you mention the number of spots.
That's right. I tried to avoid mentioning specific numbers on all of them because in some cases we don't have all the details, but in the case of the residential units.
It is 4 units. I
You're right,
used to
yes.
work there when it was La Fiesta, so I'm familiar with the property. And then what I also would add is one that's not displayed is the another one on El Camino down north from that has acquired 2 spots for some outdoor, I wouldn't call it dining, but that is the another outdoor that has converted two spots, just so that we're inclusive to all. Yeah, questions from colleagues? Vice Mayor?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the presentation. So I'll just go in order from the way that the presentation went. So starting with the parklets. Do we have an estimate of what the construction cost of a parklet typically is? Now I understand that you can go easy and simple, you can go super fancy. So but just kind of in general, because I'm just trying to get a sense of what the total outlay would be for a business to try to establish a parklet, because all of that construction would be on top of our permit fees.
Please, City Manager.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Tom Hamilton, Javon Grogan, City Manager. As you alluded to, it is a very wide range, right? And part of your question would be what a business would pay. Oftentimes, businesses may do the work themselves, they may hire contractors, and then certainly the aesthetics of them can be a wide range. I would say a very, very general number is somewhere between $10,000 to $60,000, and certainly they can go upwards of $60,000 for some of the nicer parklets that you've seen. But they are done right. They are not inexpensive, and certainly they need to be constructed in a way that will allow the stormwater to pass underneath, and so you need a certain amount of lateral sort of structural support. In addition, I would add that our regulations in particular call for the use of K-rail, which will be an added cost that some cities don't do, but we had a long conversation about safety. And in addition, that K-rail to be aesthetically pleasing, either screened or painted, which would add an additional cost.
Right.
And so I would imagine that these would be on the higher end of that scale.
Great, thank you. And it's incredibly important that the K-rail be included. I remember during the pandemic driving on Columbus Avenue in San Francisco by parklets that had been established, and it was just plywood. And the speed, the people were going 40 next to plywood. It was insane. So we don't want that. So we have monthly power washing of our sidewalks downtown. Would a parklet owner get power washing of the parklet space as part of their annual use?
No. What is currently envisioned is that the business would be fully responsible for all maintenance and upkeep. The contract that we have for power washing really just, at this point, does the public right-of-way, and at this point, we were not envisioned to increase that contract to cover parklets.
And, it would be up to the whole council to recommend, but I would at least think it would be worth looking at what kind of options we could provide, since we're going to have power washers, since the folks doing that power washing would already be there. So we can talk about that when we get to the comment part after later on tonight. And then I think it's my last question. Yeah, my last question on the parking fees and parking requirements. I remember the Planning Commission recommended and the City Council adopted rules specifically just for the downtown corridor for buildings built before, I want to say 2005, but I don't remember what the year cutoff was, that reduced the parking requirements. Are those reduced parking requirements what we've been talking about tonight?
So the 1 per 1,000 square feet of interior space for a restaurant.
Yeah.
At this point, I can't connect that to the prior regulation. So why don't we do a little research and we'll see if we can determine if that is the.
All right. Okay, everything else is comment, so I'll reserve that.
Thank you. Any other questions on the presentation? Councilmember Alvarez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For new business application, is this parklet part of the intake process? Are we encouraging, or the parklet will be introduced to new business owner, that they have the option?
Absolutely. So when we start the parklet program, it is envisioned that we would first do an outreach to all existing businesses and have it on our website, et cetera. But when a new restaurant comes in downtown, they would be made aware of the parklet program.
Thank you.
Councilmember Salazar.
Thank you. As far as the park and lieu fees, is that a one-time fee that gets assessed, or is it an ongoing thing? And I heard that there was some nexus to something, but is that like the cost of?
Those fees, I was reminded of actually what it costs to create a parking space. Those parking and lieu fees are meant to be a fee that is structured significantly below our cost to add an additional parking space. And so when we did the downtown parking study and did the nexus study for our parking and lieu fee, that fee is to both be supportive of businesses that may take away parking or not have enough parking, and help create funding for a future parking garage. You may recall, and council may recall, it is extremely expensive when you're building a parking garage. And the big question is, are you doing above grade or subterranean? Subterranean, underground, you're looking at anywhere from $80,000 to over $100,000 per space. If you're doing above ground, somewhere between $30,000 to $60,000. And so the fees, while they are high, or an individual business may look at them and say, wow, there's an in lieu fee of $3,000 or $11,000, it is very, very much reduced for what our cost would be to develop a parking space when we build a parking garage.
Okay. And another question is whether the commitment to maintain.
So it would be with the business, and it would be a revocable encroachment permit, meaning that if they were not keeping up with all the.
Example, that a business goes out of business and they leave a parklet behind, then it would be, I guess, the city's responsibility to remove it or wait and see if the next business is interested in keeping it. And if they're not, I guess we're still on the hook to get rid of it.
Responsibility would first go to the business. In the event of a bankruptcy, right? While we can require them, we would be like any other creditor. And so what we would likely do is certainly remove it if it's a problem, and then attempt to collect. And certainly if it was a restaurant that went out of business, before we incurred that expense, we would certainly make sure that it's in a safe condition and see if a new tenant would like to reutilize that parklet.
And then for maintenance, say there's an easement or something, or we're repaving the street, how would we handle?
Looking to our Public Works Department, in general, what a revocable encroachment permit requires is that it is the business that has the responsibility to remove it and reinstall it. And so they are being given the exclusive right to utilize that space. But if we need to do maintenance, whether it's paving or utilities, it is their responsibility to pay to remove it and to reinstall it.
Possible, we understand that they're incurring an expense, and however, if we do need to do maintenance or need to access the site, it is a business owner's responsibility.
Okay, yeah, and so with hearing that the cost, that was it, thank you.
Any other questions on the presentation? Council.
So this seating area, parklet's available, and then remove the person. Can somebody bring the food and, you just think on, or like, how does that get enforced?
Thank you, Councilmember Medina. Good question. Know that we looked at all of them, but in particular, one of the reasons why staff initially recommended that we do an encroachment space from the city, and so if someone occupies that parklet, it is if the situation required that. There are other types of parklets, many in San Francisco, that are more public parklets, and any business along the strip can use. And then it would be similar to a public plaza where a business would not be able to say, well, we pay for the exclusive right and this is for our customers. To control it and use it as they see fit.
Okay. I guess I'll save for comments for later. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the questions that some of my colleagues have asked or of mine on this topic, or any members that are via Zoom. So if there's any members that in the public at this time would like to speak on this topic, this would be the time to please step forward. No? Oh, please. Please, this is why I want to make sure. I want folks that are here first to be having the opportunity, then we'll go to Zoom. So once I go from here.
And I have a question, just for clarification. The parking spaces on the park in our area, on our properties, if we take away spaces for outdoor seating, which we've already been using that.
See in the window that there's a particular dish that looks very appetizing that's advertised.
Oh, sorry. If we conclude public comment, when we bring it back, staff will address any
So
concerns.
what we will do, in case you have something else to add, let's get all,
I really don't have any questions. I just want to put some input. Like, I'm standing with Celia's, I'm standing with Maswa's, I'm standing with The Corner, and I'm standing with other small business restaurants in a couple of our parking spaces, having the table out there. It's just made it more inviting for the community, inviting for families. Everything is so family-friendly. And, our place is, so many people, residents come and say, I used to come here with my deceased mom, my deceased dad. And oh my God, when I get these recipes, the peach cobbler, it's nostalgic. It makes me go back to that, revert back to that. And we're just a place that want to stay in the community, and struggling business, just remodel. And all we want to do is just open it up for the community as we have. And with these stipulations that would propose, it would hinder that from us generating any income. And if we don't generate any income, then the city doesn't generate any income, and from our little part. And I just want to say that since we've been there, they have always used the little 1 or 2 spots that we have. We have it very safe. And I just want to say that us and the other restaurants, I stand with them. We just want to continue doing so. We have not had any problems with our community. Our community welcomes it, and we welcome our community. And we're just trying to survive through this post-pandemic that keeps coming back and forth, and that also being outdoor, it also makes it a bit safer, and it keeps the flow of the COVID even down because you're not so much inside, you're outside. So it's a win-win for our staff, for the community, for the customers as well. So that's all we had to say, and we love being there. We want to continue being there, and we love this community, and we're here for the community. That's why we made it so community-friendly. Little kids come in there, they play the arcade for free, the mini arcade. They play a mini pool table for free. It's families that do it. It's a great bonding experience, as family time at the dinner table should be. And that's what we bring to San Bruno, and that's what we want to stay and do. And that's what Chef May wanted to say.
Thank you for your
Well,
consideration.
thanks to both of you being here and your comments, and thank you, Chef.
You're welcome.
Other members of the public that are here this evening, please, now is the time to step forward. Thank you. And you'll have 3 minutes, and the city clerks will start the timer.
Hello, my name is Tiffany. I am an immigrant from Cambodia, and we've been, established in Camino Corner since 1988, and we've been serving the community for 35 years. And we've grown to love the city and appreciate it very much. So with that said, I'm here today for one reason, the outdoor dining. And as Humble and Pop Shop, we weather all the challenges through the year, from the economic crashes to the pressure that we face from the expensive and fast changes of the Bay Area. The latest is the COVID-19. The pandemic not only threatened the physical well-being of the San Bruno residents, but also to the mental health. And it's so important that, with the isolation, so when we're able to open the door dining out for our customer, especially our senior, and see the joy in their smile getting together over a meal, that really, really lighten up. So we did take 2 spaces parking spot of the private property that we have, and we really enlarged the area, make it very welcoming, and like Letty say, with Rib Shack, we're right in El Camino. So parking is not a problem for us at all. I only wanted to, with the governor declared that the COVID-19 is over, but as they in the servant industry, it's scary for a lot of senior. I am, here today representing all the area and all the restaurant, and hope that the city would allow us to continue outdoor dining. Thank you so much and for your considerations.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else here this evening, here at the Senior Center, that would like to speak on this topic? Seeing none, then I'd like to please go to anybody in Zoom.
I have two virtual hands up. The first one is Virginia Yank. And Virginia, I can bring you in whenever you're ready to go ahead and speak.
Do you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to talk about Camino Corner also. We have been going there since probably 30 of the 35 years. People in the shop know everybody. When you go in, you see people because they're regulars. They come back regularly. When they were closed, we were devastated because that was our to-go place. We love the outdoor space, and there is plenty of parking on El Camino. The big gyms I don't think is open during the day, but there's always parking there. And to the north of the restaurant, there's that empty machine shop or whatever. There's parking there. There's also parking on the side streets. If we're forced to eat inside, the tables will be put back close together. And my husband and myself, I probably won't go because I cannot afford to be sick. I'm a senior and have enough other things going. Together, we'll probably just not go. So anyway, that's all I have to say. We enjoy the place. The staff help is wonderful. Tiffany comes out and talks to everybody. She knows her customers. And in fact, those girls know what you order before you even order. So to me, it's important. Parking is never, ever a problem unless you go on Sunday morning. That's the only time that it's busy, but every restaurant is busy. Look at Millbury Pancake House. There's no parking there. They're busy on Sunday, but any other day of the week, there's loads of parking. And please keep the outdoor seating available. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
The next speaker is another virtual hand, Acela Imac. Go ahead and speak when you're ready.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Isela and I'm from Celia's in San Bruno. I wasn't able to be there because I'm at work, but just wanted to say that I've appreciated everything that we've been able to do, and I understand rules, and the only thing is that I do have a lot of customers still that prefer to sit outdoors, and I'm afraid that would make my customers not want to come if we don't have outdoor. So just throwing that out there.
Thank you for your comments. Is there any other speakers?
No, I have no further virtual hands up.
Okay, with all the speakers being heard, and thank you, City Manager, I think most were comments and letting us know the history and what is important to the customers and to the community, but we did have the one question.
Sure. Please. Thank you, Mayor. So the one question, if I can restate it, was for a restaurant facility outside of downtown, can the restaurant take away the parking and go through the process as currently proposed to have outdoor dining? That answer is yes, but. So currently the city does not have a parking in lieu fee outside of downtown. Your parking in lieu fee was established for downtown with a nexus study specifically connected to providing parking facilities downtown. It would not be appropriate for us to extend that nexus to someone outside of downtown and have them pay the parking in lieu fee because they're so far away, we can't make that legal determination. However, there are a couple options in the proposed regulations and things that we can discuss subject to council direction. One of them is, as currently structured, the regulations do allow a business outside of downtown to remove parking spaces if they can provide those parking spaces elsewhere. So some businesses may have a rear parking lot that they can say, okay, we're going to move things around and put these 2 parking spaces that were in the rear, and that would satisfy the removal of 2 spaces, and now those parking spaces are just in the rear. A business could lease parking or have an arrangement with a neighboring property to say, hey, you are a business that is closed on the weekend, or you're closed when we're open. Can we utilize your parking and have an arrangement? And we would review that and say, well, that's totally appropriate because you're now making parking available. The council could direct staff to lower the parking thresholds and such that maybe for outdoor dining, the thresholds were low where the parking would not be required. However, there's another option and connected to, I believe it was in 2020, when you passed your parking compliance permit, that allows staff to make determinations on special circumstances. And so I would actually recommend that we look at that process because every property is unique. I think you really need to consider the uniqueness of the business, where they're located. Is there available parking elsewhere along the street or in another private lot? And so I think the short answer is yes, it is allowed now. The caveat is when you're not outside the downtown, there's not an in lieu fee. We likely probably would not be able to establish an in lieu fee, but you can certainly provide additional parking elsewhere on private property, or we can look at utilizing the parking compliance permit, which would allow for specific exemptions based on the unique circumstances of that property. And so, if so directed by council, this is just a study session, and so when we come back to the city council, we can certainly include details on how a special compliance permit process would work for businesses outside of downtown. But what we're really looking for in this study session is a conversation and direction for council for instructing us how you would like those final regulations to be brought back to you.
Thank you for your response. Appreciate it. Okay, with that, why don't we bring it back to council for comments and or direction? We can go around once, but whoever wishes, please.
Through the chair, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember Alvarez.
I want to circle back on a last question I had earlier. This relates to the public right-of-way dining, not the parklet specifically. I know encroachment permit, we do require them to have general liability, but what about for the businesses? Because now they're going to be conducting business on our city property, public right-of-way. Are we going to require them to have any kind of insurance in the event there's an accident that happens in our city property?
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Alvarez. Certainly, with the revocable encroachment permit, they would have to name the city as an additional insured and have liability coverage. It's probably worth mentioning when we displayed the fees, there are 2 encroachment permits. It's that encroachment permit and then revocable encroachment permit. Both of those will have separate insurances. So the encroachment permit is actually for the contractor when they're doing the work to build it. They get an encroachment permit to be in the right-of-way. The revocable encroachment permit is that long-term encroachment permit. Both of those will come with separate insurance provisions to indemnify the city.
Thank you.
Any other comment? Vice Mayor Hamilton.
Thank you. So this is following on from Councilmember Salazar's line of questioning regarding having to potentially temporarily remove a parklet in the event that maintenance is required. I would recommend that as part of before the parklet gets built in the first place, reasonable things. Obviously, stuff happens and there's emergencies that aren't foreseen, but we would just take reasonable steps to avoid that by, proactively doing work before a parklet would go up. Looking at the fees, I would recommend for the parklet program that we, subject to my colleague's opinion, that we lean toward partial cost recovery versus full cost recovery of a slam dunk in San Bruno, as it would be in less windy climates like Burlingame, for example. So our merchants would be taking more of a risk in investing in a parklet, and that parklet may not get as much use on as many days throughout the year as similar ones in other cities. So I think given that, I would recommend that we try to lower the fees into a partial cost recovery area and subsidize it just slightly, just to make it more attractive. That's just a recommendation subject to my colleagues.
Thank you. Any other comments from colleagues?
Mr. Mayor, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm just looking at the fees schedule. Why is it that our private property outdoor dining has a higher fire marshal plan review? I'm just saying, like, for existing restaurants or businesses, like our business owners here. Unlike the parklet permit fee, we're only charging $248.37 for fire marshal.
Hi, Darcy Smith, Assistant City Manager. So you're referring to the estimates of staff time, attachment 3 in the staff report, where we estimated time for different positions. And what you noted was the fire marshal's estimate is an hour of work at a fully burdened hourly rate of about $248. 1 hour for the parklet permit and 2 hours for the private property outdoor dining facility permit. And the basis for that is the parklets tend to be somewhat simpler. And again, the parklet permit would just be looking at the use, the siting of it in property facility, where the fire marshal has to do a more robust analysis around fire-rated separations. Because as you saw in the pictures and examples that were shown, a lot of times these private property facilities are kind of shoehorned into some unique spaces. Sometimes they're between buildings or close to property lines. Sometimes they involve more elaborate structures, coverings, for example. And so these tend to just be more exhaustive. And this is a permit that goes sort of beyond the use, but also looks at the improvements. So are there enclosures, coverings, et cetera, whereas the parklet permit is simpler.
Thank you.
How do we find ways to help our restaurant owners do better? And looking at the parking requirements, that's something for individual restaurants. I think that's noteworthy, that you look at it in case by case. You look at them by case instead of just saying, okay, we need so many parking spaces. So I appreciate that option, and that discretion will be in there. This is also an opportunity that we should also be looking at our parking requirements, or our parking for loading, unloading, for delivery. I think more and more businesses, restaurants, especially in our downtown, are relying on pickups. And pickup people come in and they need a parking space really quick to get in, get their parking downtown, because when people need to get their food, they do things that probably aren't the best thing. And so I think as we're doing this, that we should be considering and how we can assist those restaurants that don't have spaces, or maybe that's too much money to have outdoor dining. Maybe you just need for a sandwich shop, you just want a spot, difficult to park downtown. And taking parklets is taking away spaces. So how do we find the best fitting need for the different restaurants that we have downtown? And I think that we should definitely look into that concurrently as we're doing this, because if you don't have the funds to pay for a parklet, and maybe that's not your thing, that it's a sit-down dining thing isn't your thing. So you're next to a restaurant that is going to have the parklet, and you're like, the space. And what's going to make it better in our downtown is that being able to have those spaces to safely pick up the food and get out. So that's something I would like to, maybe my colleagues can talk about that. We've done a little bit of it downtown, but I think the business model has really changed. And we're learning this from COVID, that things evolve, and we need to evolve with how we can assist getting customers in and out of our downtown and not take up so much parking. Thank you.
Presentation was very thorough, and I do appreciate staff's effort to go and look at the multitude of situations that have emerged, and I think the proposals are pretty sound and well thought out. So I'm definitely in favor of moving forward with it.
Thank you. Oh, did you have something?
Well, I didn't, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier. Should I had a couple of suggestions for direction, but I didn't take the time to seek concurrence. I just said.
No, I'm trying to write down what everybody's saying so we can circle back around, but I had two that you had mentioned.
Great, thank you.
Were there in addition?
No, so it was the.
I'm not sure about the fees when we say not full recovery, but partial. That's a lot of variable. Maybe staff needs to examine maybe an option A or B, just to be specific on that. On your first comment in regards to the upcoming maintenance and being, let's say, proactive, I concur with that. I think Councilmember Alvarez, did it answer your question regarding the fire marshal? Okay, so that takes care of that. Councilmember Medina, when you had mentioned about the delivery and pickups, we have two businesses here that are not in the downtown. So to me, I always believe in looking at the community and how we assist everyone equally and equitably. But also I think that because staff is bringing this back in March or April to the council. And I think that becomes a whole different topic that is much more detailed, because what I heard you saying was a more in-depth item than what we have before us. But those are just some of my comments. Go ahead.
Through the mayor, to make things a little more concrete for the fees, perhaps we could adjust the fees so that the total, and just individual ones at staff's discretion, so that maybe we can get that number down to like 5,000 rather than 7,200 for the total fees for permit plus 2 years use, just to, leave a business with more in the pocketbook to be able to actually construct a parklet. And so I'm certainly not saying that the city should eat the entire cost of all the permitting, but I'm just wondering if we can maybe subsidize it a bit, and so maybe reduce it to around 5,000.
Thanks for the Burlingame. They had to deal with that, like on Broadway, and then who pays for that? Because now that revenue has now ceased. So those are some of the things to staff. If you don't mind, can you read back to me or what you think you've heard to make sure we're on the same, so that we're all together, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
I think there are three things, and if I can articulate them and then make some comments on them, because I think there's probably only one, maybe one and a half, where we would sort of need further discussion.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Let's take the easier one from Councilmember Tom Hamilton. The comment was, or Vice Mayor Hamilton, the comment was, we power wash once a month. It would be nice if the parklet businesses had the option to utilize the way. I think it would be fairly straightforward for the Public Works Department to contact that business and say, we're looking at doing parklets. If someone does a parklet, what would your ballpark price be? And then see if they concur to power wash that parklet. If they concur, and only if they sort of say, sure, we'll do it, letting company will say, you know what, we don't want to do private property. We don't want to ruin their tables, their planter boxes. We power wash at X PSI, and we'll do concrete, but not tables and chairs, right? And so I think we can have that conversation and leave that between our vendor and the business, should it be workable. With regard to reducing fees, with kitchens are for 100% cost recovery. We do have other cost recovery percentages that we can, if so directed, bring the city council back with other recommendations. I would proffer that we would look to lower the initial cost as configured based on estimated revenue per stall once we implement parking meters. And so I think that it would be easier to reduce the one-time cost for the city's review, but leave those annual fees as structured. And so if so directed, we can bring the city council back options for that. I think the last item, other policy with regard to temporary loading zones. Certainly if so directed, we as in staff can look into that. I do think that will take more time. We would need to assign one of our traffic engineers and to analyze where additional loading zones would be. We would certainly want to make informed decisions and talk to merchants downtown. Probably worth reminding the city council that we did, COVID years are running together, in 21 or 22 implement loading zones downtown. There likely can be more. I will say overall, parking downtown is a very large and complicated issue in and of itself. The largest thing with regard to parking downtown that we're actively working on, and we will be all parking meters, and we have better enforcement, and the on-street spaces are more than the off-street spaces. I think we collectively in the city will have a better understanding of what the true parking demand and parking usage is downtown, such that we can make more informed decisions in our time parking zones. And I think we've all observed that cars sit there for far too long. And so once we implement meters and bring on additional parking, again, I think we'll have a better handle on what the true appropriate demand is and where additional loading zones may be appropriate.
Thank you for the recap.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Medina.
Yes. So, understood, to do a comprehensive all restaurant, by the Rib Shack, it's the boba place. And people come in and out, in and out, in and out, and it's very, really difficult. So if you had shorter term parking, because if all it takes is one car to park there and stay there, and then it makes it more difficult for anyone to get in and out of. If you were to ask the restaurant owner, hey, would you benefit from having the short-term parking right in front so people could make an order and come in and get it and get out? Because it's very difficult to get in and out of that parking lot, and in other parking lots. So it seems like specifically for that one business that you could do that and kind of take care of it all in one stop.
Thank you.
Hey, Juan, go and then I'll follow up.
Yes, thank you for that question. Through the mayor, business wanted to establish short-term parking, they could request that of Public Works, and there are policies established on which we would go by to see if one would be warranted, and so there is a process in place already to request that.
City Manager.
Just as a follow-up, Councilmember Medina, I totally understand what you're saying is you're already out there, sort of look at the neighboring business. I just want to sort of articulate that for the policy regulations that we're talking about right now, we do not currently have a project where we're going out and assessing loading zones and parking in businesses. And I'm not saying what you're articulating is a bad thing. It is just a different policy analysis and a different project that very much would be disconnected to what we're talking about here with regard to outdoor dining. And my prior comments were actually about downtown, because I'm sorry, that's where I thought your initial comments were about adding additional loading zones downtown. And the business you're referring to now is not downtown, it's along El Camino Real, which has both private, very legitimately a policy issue, but a separate one from outdoor dining.
Councilmember Medina.
Totally understand. And just, it was an opportunity to comment on the process and the need in our community as we see it, so, or as I see it. And don't want to slow this from proceeding, so understood. And with that ability for a location to request the parking space, we can also look, I can also guide people to that as well, so thank you.
That request.
Thank you again. Any other final comments? What the city manager articulated, I'm going to assume how this last discussion just went, it was not about the parking there. He brought about the power wash. You heard how his thought process, reduced fees. He was talking about lowering the initial.
I concur, then. I'm fine with it.
Mr. Salazar, did you concur with what the city manager was saying, or is there a caveat?
I heard him.
No, it's good. Okay. Okay. So I would say normally, all five of us are on the same page, but that's not the new policy procedure. That means we need a motion, we need a second, but we're all here, so we don't need a roll call. Or would you like a roll call? No? Okay.
Sure. So if there is a motion, I believe you can leave the power washing item out. We will certainly work with our vendor. I think the motion would be to provide direction to staff to return to process finalized outdoor dining regulations, and when you return to council, look into the Planning Commission, and then return to the City Council.
Thank you. You say that so well, and with that, I will make that a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion made, R. Medina's, seconded by Vice Mayor. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing no opposed. Any abstentions? Hearing no abstentions, 5-0. City Manager has direction. With that, we will go ahead and adjourn this meeting, and thanks everybody's participation and staff to the next meeting, which will